I was kneeling on the floor of my son's old bedroom with a cardboard box open in front of me when I found the report card, and I almost laughed at the grades. The same C's and D's I remembered. My Danny, never a scholar, never going to be. Then I turned it over to the back, to where the teacher signs at the end of the year, and I read one sentence that his fifth-grade teacher had written in 1997. And kneeling there on that floor, 30 years of how I had quietly seen my own son came apart in my hands. One line. A teacher I barely remembered had written one line about my boy 3 decades ago, and I had either never read it or never understood it, and it told me something true about my son that had taken me until I was 61 years old to finally see. I want to tell you what Mrs. Albright wrote, because it changed how I understand my child and what I have spent my whole life being proud of and ashamed of and measuring all wrong. My name is Peggy Dolan. I am 61 years old, and I waited tables at the same diner in Wichita, Kansas for almost 40 years before I retired. I know how to read people fast, I always thought. You learn it carrying coffee for 4 decades. But it turns out I had been misreading the most important person in my life for 30 years. That is the part that humbles me most, honestly. I prided myself on it. 40 years of reading strangers across a counter, knowing in 3 seconds who needed a refill and who needed a kind word, and who was about to stiff me on the tip. I could read a whole table of strangers like a book, and I could not read my own son. Or rather, I read him perfectly well. I saw the kindness, I just refused to score it as valuable because the scorecard in my head did not have a column for it. It is a strange kind of blindness, to see something clearly and still not be able to value it. I think a lot of us have it. We can spot a good person across a diner in 3 seconds and still fail to honor the good person sitting at our own kitchen table because we have decided in advance what counts, and goodness, somehow, did not make our list. I am going to tell you what the report card said, but first you have to understand the quiet shame I am not proud of, the shame I carried about my own son. I need to say first that I love Danny. I have always loved him, fiercely, the way you love the child who gave you the most worry. But love and pride are not the same thing, and the hard truth I have to admit is that for most of his life, underneath the love, there was a thin layer of disappointment I never quite managed to scrub off. Danny was never going to be a student. The grades were always poor. Not from lack of trying exactly, he just was not built for school. The tests, the reading, the sitting still. I spent his whole childhood worrying over those report cards. Sure, they were a forecast of a hard life. And the forecast, by the world's measures, came true. He did not finish college. He works a plain job. He is a maintenance man at a senior care facility, fixes things, has done it for years, makes an ordinary living. I used to soften it when people asked, "Oh, Danny's in facilities management," I'd say, dressing up the maintenance job in a nicer suit of words, the way you do when you are a little ashamed. I cringe now remembering that. As if the work of keeping a building safe and warm for frail old people were something to be embarrassed about. As if the title mattered more than the fact that the handrails Danny installs are the difference between an old woman walking and an old woman falling. I had so thoroughly swallowed the idea that some work is for bragging and some work is for hiding that I could not see that my son's plain job was, in its quiet way, more genuinely useful than half the impressive-sounding careers I envied for him. He keeps the vulnerable safe. There are worse things to be than the man who does that. He never made money, never made a name, never gave me the thing I am ashamed to admit I wanted, which was a son I could brag about at the diner the way the other women bragged about their doctors and their lawyers and their kids who did well. I never said any of this to him, not once. But a mother's disappointment does not need to be spoken to be felt, and I have come to believe, with a great deal of pain, that my son felt mine for 30 years, sitting quietly underneath my love like a stone in a shoe. That is the woman who opened that box. That is who found the report card. I have to tell you where the shame came from, because it did not come from nowhere, and I am not entirely a villain in this. I grew up poor, the daughter of a waitress who became a waitress, and I wanted more for my children the way every parent does. Wanting more is not a sin. But somewhere along the way, the wanting curdled into a very particular idea of what more meant. It meant grades, then college, then a respectable career, then money, then the kind of life you could point to. I had absorbed, without ever choosing it, the whole American scorecard of what makes a child a success, and I held my son up against it every single year of his life, and every single year he came up short on it. And every single year I felt that small, private sinking that I told myself was concern, but was really disappointment wearing concern's coat. I was clearing out the small bedroom that used to be his, turning it into something useful, finally, after all these years. And the report card was in a box of his old school things my late husband had saved, the kind of box you keep and never open. My husband, Danny's father, had been gone 6 years by then, and I think now that he may have understood our son better than I did, in his quiet way. He was not a talker, but he never seemed disappointed in Danny the way I secretly was. He would just say, "The boy's all right, Peg, leave him be." And I took it for a father not caring enough about the future. I wonder now if he simply saw what I could not. He was the one who saved this box, after all, kept Danny's school things when I would probably have thrown them out. And I like to think that somewhere in him, he knew there was something in it worth keeping. He did not live to see me finally understand. That is one more regret in a story full of them, that the two people who saw my son clearest, his father and his teacher, both died before the mother caught up to what they always knew. Seeing those grades again brought it all back. The old worry, the old disappointment, the familiar little sigh. C's, D's. A teacher's note that he needs to apply himself, the same thing they wrote every single year. I had a whole stack of them in that box, years of report cards, and they all said variations of the same thing on the front, that polite institutional code for "your child is not succeeding." Needs to apply himself, not working to potential, struggles to focus. I had treated those phrases as the verdict on my son. It never once occurred to me that a report card front is only the part the system can measure, the part that fits in a grid of letters and numbers, and that everything that actually mattered about my child was, by design, exiled to the cramped little comment box on the back, where it could be skimmed past by a tired parent in a hurry. The system measured the wrong things in big, bold boxes on the front and put the right thing in small cursive on the back, and I, like the system, had read only the front. I was about to set it aside, just another piece of evidence in the long case I had built about my son's whole life. And then I turned it over to the back page, the part I suppose I had skimmed past when he was 11, and I was a tired waitress with no time. The section where the homeroom teacher writes her end-of-year comment. Mrs. Albright, 5th grade. And I read what she had written, and I had to sit all the way down on the floor. I should explain why it hit so hard, beyond just the words themselves. It was the date, 1997. Danny was 11, which meant this woman had written down the truth about my son when he was still a child, when there was still time. Time for me to raise him knowing he was treasured for the right reasons. Time to spare him 30 years of feeling like a disappointment. The warning had been delivered on schedule. It had arrived in my hands the very year I most needed it. And I had not read it. I had skimmed past the most important sentence anyone ever wrote about my child because I was too busy being upset about the C's on the front. 30 years of his quiet ache, and mine, could have been avoided if I had simply turned the report card over and read the back in 1997. That is the thought I had to sit down under. Not just that I had been wrong, but that the correction had been in the house the whole time, waiting, while I got it wrong anyway, year after year. She had written, in careful cursive, "Daniel will never be the top of the class, and I have stopped wishing he would be, because Daniel is something the class needs more. He is the kindest child I have taught in 20 years. He sits with the children no one will sit with. He notices when someone is sad before the adults do. Whatever he becomes, the world will be a gentler place for having him in it. Do not worry about his grades, Mrs. Dolan. Worry about deserving a boy this good." I have thought about that one phrase more than any words anyone has ever written to me. There is a sternness in it, almost a rebuke, from a woman who clearly understood that the danger in my house was never going to be my son. It was going to be me, and my scorecard, and my idea of success. She was not really writing about Danny's grades at all. She was writing about a mother she could already see was going to spend years worrying about the wrong end of the problem. And she was right. The problem in our family was never that Danny wasn't good enough. The problem was that his mother kept asking the wrong question. Mrs. Albright handed me the right question in one line in 1997. Not how do I make this boy more impressive, but how do I become worthy of a child this kind? And it took me 30 years to even read it, let alone try to answer it. I sat on that floor and I read it 5 times. Worry about deserving a boy this good. A teacher I barely remembered had looked at my son in 1997, the son I was so worried about, the son whose grades kept me up at night, and she had seen, clear as day, the one thing about him that mattered most, the one thing I had spent the next 30 years failing to count because it did not show up on any report card. She had measured my son with the right ruler when he was 11 years old, and I had spent 3 decades measuring him with the wrong one and finding him short, and never once noticing that he was, by the only measure that actually matters, absolutely extraordinary. I tried to remember Mrs. Albright, and slowly she came back to me. An older woman, near the end of her career that year, the kind of teacher the school district probably thought of as past her prime, set in her ways. I had not paid her much mind at the time. She was just one more teacher writing one more note about my son not applying himself, or so I had assumed without reading carefully. But she had not written that at all. While I was a tired young waitress skimming the grades and sighing, this woman, near the end of 40 years in a classroom, had taken the time to look past everything the system measured and write down the truth about my boy, and she had even, gently, written it as a warning to me. Worry about deserving a boy this good. She had seen, somehow, not just Danny, but me. She had seen the mother who was going to spend the next 30 years worrying about the wrong thing, and she had tried to warn her, in cursive, on the back of a report card, and the mother had not listened because the mother had not even read it. Because here is what happened next, sitting on that floor with that report card in my hands. I started thinking about who my son actually is. Not the grades, not the job title, not the bragging rights I never got. Who he actually is, as a man, in the world. And the picture that assembled itself was almost unbearable, because it was the exact picture Mrs. Albright had predicted, and I had been too busy being disappointed to see it. I thought about the children no one would sit with, the phrase from her note, and I suddenly remembered things from his childhood that I had filed away wrong at the time. The strange kid down the block, the one the other boys were cruel to, who Danny used to bring home for lunch. I had worried it would hurt Danny's standing, make him a target too. The disabled girl in his class, he walked to the bus every day for 2 years. I had thought it was sweet, but slightly odd. A dozen small moments where my son had instinctively moved toward the lonely and the overlooked, and where I, his own mother, had felt a flicker of worry that it marked him as a follower, a soft touch, not a winner. I had watched him be exactly the child Mrs. Albright described, in real time, for years, and I had half worried about it instead of falling to my knees in gratitude. The evidence had been everywhere. I had just been reading it with the wrong eyes. My Danny, who works at the senior facility, do you know what the families say about him? They write letters. They ask for him by name. Because he does not just fix the broken handrail in old Mr. Peterson's room, he sits with Mr. Peterson, who has no family left, and listens to his stories every day on his own time. My Danny is the one who calls me every single morning, just to check, has done it for years, the only one of my children who never forgets. My Danny took in his friend's kids for a whole summer when that friend was in trouble, no questions asked, on a maintenance man's salary. He slept on his own couch for 3 months so those kids could have his bed. He never mentioned it to me. I found out from the friend years later. That is the through line of my son's entire life. Once you know to look for it. He gives up his own comfort, quietly, for people who need it more, and he does not tell anyone, because to Danny, it is not a sacrifice worth mentioning, it is just what you do. The world has a word for people like that, and the word is not failure, which is the word I had been using in the privacy of my own heart for 30 years. The boy who sat with the children no one would sit with grew up into the man who sits with the people the world forgets. When I really let that sentence land, that the 11-year-old and the 38-year-old were the same person, doing the same beautiful thing, just in a bigger room, I understood that Danny had never actually changed. He had been exactly this his whole life. The consistency of it was staggering. Most of us are one person as children and become someone else. Danny had simply been, from the start, the man he is now, in a smaller body. The kindness was not something he developed or learned or grew into. It was just him, bone deep, from the beginning, as fundamental as his eye color, and a teacher had seen it and named it, and tried to tell his mother, and his mother had spent the next 3 decades waiting for him to become someone more impressive, never understanding that he had arrived already complete, already the best version of a human being, on the very first day. Mrs. Albright told me exactly who he would be when he was 11. The world will be a gentler place for having him in it. It is. It measurably is. There are lonely old people in Wichita whose last years are warmer because my son is in them. And I had been ashamed of him. I keep coming back to one thing he does that I had completely failed to understand the value of. Every morning, at the senior facility, before his shift even starts, Danny makes the rounds of the residents who never get visitors, just to say good morning, to ask how they slept, to be a face that knows their name. The facility does not pay him for it. It is not his job. He just decided, years ago, that no one in that building should go a whole day without one person being glad to see them, and so he made himself that person, quietly, every morning for years, telling no one. I only know because a nurse there told me, at a Christmas thing, assuming I already knew what my son was like. I did not know. The mother did not know. A stranger in scrubs knew my son's character better than I did because she had bothered to look and I had been too busy being disappointed. I had been ashamed of the kindest man I know because he never made the kind of money or earned the kind of title that I could mention at the diner. I had a treasure, and I spent 30 years apologizing for him in my own heart because he was not a different, lesser kind of valuable. I want to be honest about how hard that floor was to get up from, because the grief of it was real. I had not just misjudged my son, I had let him feel it. 30 years of small sighs over report cards, 30 years of asking about his job in a certain tone, 30 years of my face doing something, just slightly, when other people's children's successes came up. He had felt all of it. The kindest man in Wichita had grown up under his own mother's quiet disappointment, and had responded to it not by becoming hard, the way a lesser person would have, but by becoming even kinder, by calling me every single morning, by being unfailingly gentle with a woman who had never quite let him feel like enough. That was the part that put me face down. He had kept loving me, kept showing up for me, kept being good to me, through 30 years of my not being proud of him. The proof of exactly how good he was had been sitting right there in his response to my own failure to see it. Because think about what it takes. A child raised under a parent's quiet disappointment usually does one of 2 things. He hardens and gives the disappointment back with interest, and the family curdles. Or he crumbles and spends his life trying and failing to win an approval that never quite comes. Those are the normal outcomes, and I have watched both play out in other families at the diner over 40 years. Danny did neither. Danny took 30 years of his mother not being proud of him and somehow metabolized it into more gentleness, not less. He kept calling, kept showing up, kept being soft with a woman who had not earned his softness. I do not fully understand how a person does that. I only know that it is the rarest and best thing I have ever seen, and it was happening right in front of me the whole time, and I had it filed under, "My son who never amounted to much." I did not finish clearing the room. I got up off that floor, and I put the report card in my purse, and I drove to my son's little apartment, and I knocked on his door on a regular Tuesday with no warning. He opened the door surprised, a little worried. "Is something wrong, Mom?" Because a surprise visit from me apparently still registered as possible bad news, and I felt that too, like another small knife. And I did not know how to say any of the big things, so I just took the report card out of my purse and I handed it to him and I said, "Read the back. Read what your teacher wrote." and I watched my 38-year-old son read Mrs. Albright's words, and I watched his face change, and I watched this grown man's eyes fill up, and he looked at me and said quietly, "She really wrote that?" And I said yes. And then I said the thing I should have said 10,000 times across 30 years and never once had. My voice broke on it, because 30 years of unsaid things were all trying to come out through one sentence at once. I wanted to apologize for every sigh, every tone, every time my face fell when his cousin made partner or the neighbor's boy bought the big house. I wanted to take back 3 decades in a single conversation, which of course you cannot do. So I did not try to say all of it. I just said the truest, simplest version. The version Mrs. Albright would have approved of, plain and direct, the way you tell someone the thing that matters most. I said, "Danny, she was right about you, and I was wrong, and I have never in my life been prouder of anyone than I am of you. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what your teacher saw when you were 11. And my son, the kindest man I know, did not say anything about the 30 years. He just hugged me. Of course he did. That is exactly who he has always been. We sat in his small kitchen after that for a long time, longer than I had sat with my son in years, and we talked the way we had not talked in decades. And at some point, he told me something that I will carry for the rest of my life. He said he had always known I wished he'd done better. He said it gently, with no accusation, just as a fact between us we could finally name, and that for a long time it had hurt, but that somewhere along the way he had made peace with it. "I figured out I'd rather be the way I am and have you a little disappointed," he said, "than be the way you wanted and not be me." My son had chosen his own goodness over his mother's approval, consciously, and made his peace with the cost, and never once held it against me. I do not think I have ever heard anything braver. He had been the grown-up about it for years, while I was still being the child, clinging to a scorecard, and he had simply let me, and loved me through it, and waited. Not even waited, because he never expected this day to come, just lived gently alongside my disappointment without letting it make him bitter. Mrs. Albright really had no idea how right she was. That was a few months ago. Things are different between us now, in a way I can feel in every phone call. The morning calls are different for one. He still calls every morning, like always, but now I am actually present for them. I ask about the residents by name. I listen to the small stories of his small good days, and I tell him, often, that I am proud of him, because I have 30 years of not saying it to make up for, and I am not going to run out of chances to say it now if I can help it. He gets a little embarrassed when I say it, even now. "Okay, Mom, okay," he says, the way you do when someone keeps thanking you. But I can hear, underneath the embarrassment, a thing settling in him that I think had been unsettled for a very long time. A boy can wait his whole life to hear his mother say she is proud of who he actually is, not who she wished he'd been. I almost made him wait forever. I am grateful past words that I did not. I had Mrs. Albright's comment framed, the actual report card, poor grades and all, with her words on the back, and I gave it to Danny, and he hung it in his apartment, and he told me it is the best thing anyone ever gave him. I tell people about my son now. I tell them at the grocery store, at church, anywhere they will listen. My son is the kindest man in Wichita. Ask anyone at the care home. And I have noticed something doing it. When I used to listen to those other mothers brag about their successful children, there was always a faint competition in it, a keeping score, and I think the children being bragged about could probably feel that they were being used a little, held up as trophies. When I brag about Danny now, it is not like that at all, because I am not bragging to win anything. I am just telling people the truth about a good man because the truth delights me. There is a different quality to pride when it is aimed at the right thing. The old pride I wanted, the doctor's son, the lawyer's son, would have been about me, about how I looked. This pride is entirely about him. It asks for nothing back. It turns out that is what real pride in your child is supposed to feel like, and I had never felt it until I was 61, because I had been chasing the counterfeit version my whole life. I brag about him the way those other mothers bragged about their doctors, except I am not pretending or reaching. I am telling the simple truth, and it took me 61 years to learn that it was the truth worth telling. I tried, a while ago, to find Mrs. Albright, to thank her. I learned she passed away some years back. I wish she could have known that her one sentence, written about a struggling 11-year-old in 1997, finally reached the mother it was meant for, 30 years later, and fixed something that needed fixing. I think she would have liked that. I think a woman who could see my Danny that clearly would have understood exactly what her words did. I want to leave you with the two things this taught me. The first is about the rulers we use to measure the people we love. The world hands us a very specific measuring stick: grades, money, titles, the things you can brag about, and most of us pick it up without thinking and start measuring our children, our partners, ourselves against it. And anyone who comes up short on that ruler, we quietly file under disappointment. Even people we love, even people who are, by every measure that actually matters, magnificent. I did that to the kindest man I know for 30 years. So I am asking you to look hard at the people in your life you have felt a little disappointed in, and to ask whether you have been measuring them with the world's ruler instead of the real one. Because the qualities that actually make a life worth something, kindness, loyalty, showing up, gentleness with the forgotten, those never appear on a report card, and they are worth more than everything that does. The second thing is simpler and more urgent, and I learned it the hard way. If you have been quietly disappointed in someone you love, they almost certainly know, no matter how carefully you think you have hidden it. Disappointment does not need words. It leaks out in tone and timing and the look on your face, and the people closest to us read it fluently. So, if you have been carrying a quiet shame about someone who does not deserve it, a child, a sibling, a spouse, anyone, do not wait 30 years and a box in a closet to make it right. Go and tell them, today, the thing you actually see when you look at them clearly. Tell them what they are worth by the ruler that counts. I got to do it while my son was still young enough, and I was still here to say it. Do not wait for a report card to give you permission. We measure the people we love with the wrong ruler far too often, and the cost of it is years you do not get back. If this story landed for you, drop the word report in the comments below. I read them. It tells me which stories are worth telling next. Subscribe for new stories, real patterns, full narratives, the long game. 2 small pieces of wisdom from this one before I go. First, check which ruler you are using to measure the people you love. The world hands us one specific measuring stick: grades, money, titles, the things you can brag about, and we pick it up without thinking and quietly file anyone who comes up short under disappointment, even people who are, by the measures that actually matter, extraordinary. I did that to the kindest man I know for 30 years. Look hard at anyone you have felt let down by, and ask whether you have been using the world's ruler instead of the real one. Kindness, loyalty, showing up, gentleness with the forgotten, none of it shows up on a report card, and all of it is worth more than everything that does. Second, if you are quietly disappointed in someone you love, they already know, so fix it now, out loud. Disappointment needs no words. It leaks out in your tone, your timing, the look on your face, and the people closest to us read it fluently. If you have been carrying an unfair shame about a child, a sibling, a spouse, do not wait 30 years and a box in a closet to set it right. Go tell them today what you actually see when you look at them clearly, and what they are worth by the ruler that counts. Do not wait for a report card to give you permission. We measure the people we love with the wrong ruler far too often, and the cost is years you never get back. We measure the people we love with the wrong ruler. I'll see you next time.